Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. I'm Charles Williams, and together we'll explore untold stories, bold ideas, and innovative approaches that transform our schools and communities. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Counter Narrative Podcast. As always, thank you so much for being here. And to be honest, I'm loving this new format. I know that we talked about it before. We started with video, we went just straight to audio, and we are back with videos because Anchor has forced me onto a new platform. But I'm enjoying stretching it out into this new space. And I'm really excited to have the conversation here today. As I often talk about in this space and in others, I'm a school leader. And then one of those things that I get to do as a school leader through something called the Fund in Chicago, if you follow me on social media, I'm sure you've seen it, is I get to host PLCs for other school leaders across CPS. And one of the major factors behind that is a group called Lead by Learning. And they're not from Chicago, though. They're all the way from the other side of the country, out of Oakland, out of Northeastern, in Oakland, and in fact, a new status with one of the colleges there as a program. So today I have with me is Jennifer and Sarah from Lead by Learning. So excited to have you in this space. Roles get to be reversed. Usually I'm on the other side. So now I get to interview you, have this conversation, facilitate it with both of you. So before we jump in, why don't we kick things off? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what your role is in education, and maybe even a little bit of the journey behind how you ended up in this space. So whoever wants to start off.
Yes, well, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm Jennifer Ahn. I'm the interim executive director at Lead by Learning. I've been there since 2013, and my journey to where I am today really started when I immigrated to this country at 2. And in my kind of learning journey as a child, kind of believing that I wanted something more in life, but not sure how to get it because I was a first generation college student of low socioeconomic status, an immigrant. School really became both a pathway for me to try to, experience thriving in my life, but also it became a journey of pain because there were lots of challenges along the way. And that really motivated me to think about how I can improve the experiences that students have on a daily basis when I grow up. And so that journey led me to be a teacher, high school English teacher, a high school counselor, and then now here, because along that path, something that really guided me is this belief that if I want to support students to learn, then I really have to learn and grow as a professional. And I was really lucky to have some meaningful experiences with inquiry along the way. And so that made me feel like that was an important lever to provide other educators. And now we get to do it not only in Oakland, but also in Chicago with you. So that's kind of my journey here. And even now, I get excited every day when I think about the ways that we can engage adults so that they can meaningfully engage their students.
I appreciate that. And I don't know if you know this, but my admin career actually started in 2013. So there's some, synchronization there. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Sarah, tell us a little bit about you and your role.
Yeah, thank you for having us. So I'm Sarah Sugarman. I'm Senior Director at Lead by Learning. And education for me really started, it's in my blood, I guess. Both of my parents in different ways were educators. My maternal grandmother was a preschool teacher. My paternal grandmother was a first grade teacher. My paternal grandfather was a fifth grade teacher. So I come from a long line of teachers. And then when I started, I became a second and third grade teacher after getting my credential at Mills College. And one of my formative experiences when I was early in my teaching years was being part of what was then the program that became Lead by Learning. At that time, it was called Mills Teacher Scholars, and it was a group of recent graduates who were in the field teaching for the first couple of years, getting together and engaging in collaborative inquiry into our practice, trying to understand what was going on with our students, how we could make small adjustments to improve. And it was such a wonderful space for me in the midst of all the craziness that is learning how to be a teacher, to come and be able to take a deep breath and really pause and reflect in a way that I didn't really get to do in the daily life of teaching. And so I was in the classroom for 11 years, but when the opportunity came to join what was still Mills Teacher Scholars and became Lead by Learning and work with adults instead of students, it was an opportunity I decided to take. You know, it was hard to leave the classroom, still miss it sometimes. But it turns out that working with adult learners in many ways is just the same as working with young people. You know, they need all the same things out of their learning communities. And so I still feel that my roots in the classroom are relevant every day that I'm at Lead by Learning, even though now I get to have the benefit of sort of the bigger picture view, not just my own classroom as a system, but schools and districts as entire systems that we're trying to influence and impact. So it's been really exciting, and we have an incredible team that I learn from every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, and I will say is that I think one of the most beneficial aspects, and it's right within the name of the organization, is that concept of lead by learning. And that's, you know, something I take to heart, that we as school leaders have to be the lead learners, as my good friend and former colleague, Michael McWilliams used to say, is one of his Mac nuggets, this idea of being a lead learner, right? And so this idea that you are going to lead by learning is fantastic. And so I'm honored to also serve on your board. When I got that invite, I was humbled and honored, and it's just a testament to the work that you do. And so I appreciate that. So now that we've got all the formalities out of the way, the listeners know who you are, the viewers now know who you are. Why don't we jump in? What is it that you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I mean, we were founded by Professor Anna Rickert, and she noticed something. Her master's students would leave her, go to school, teach, come back and say, all the things you've taught us, we can't actualize in schools. And she was kind of like, what's going on in these schools? And something that she talks about over and over again is this myth of certainty. So we have this expectation that educators need to know everything. They make decisions based on expertise. And that narrative can really hinder an educator's ability to grow and learn and talk honestly about the complexity that is teaching and learning. You know, every time you engage with a student, that student is going through a whole life experience that you may not know of. You know, your students are different year to year, person to person. And so for us to really adapt and serve our students with their needs at the center, we can't just come from certainty. We have to be open to the idea that we need to learn about them and to talk about what we're confused about as we are trying to better support them. And so from this idea of, okay, we've got to bust open this myth of certainty, we Anna thought about, well, how do you do that? And a lot of it is contained in collaborative conversation and inquiry with, at the center of that. How can you see what you don't yet know unless you get multiple perspectives? How can you really concretize what's confusing you unless you actually express it, maybe even aloud with those around you? And so from that, two practices were born: public learning and supportive challenge. And I'm going to pass it over to Sarah in just a second to talk about those things. But those two practices together are the engine that support educators to come together and center their professional learning on the people they're trying to support, their students and their families.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So, we talk about public learning as a practice, and we also talk about it as a culture, because a culture of public learning goes beyond just the conversations that we have in our collaboration time and extends to the way we move through the world as educators, as Jen was talking about, from that stance of kind of assuming that we don't know everything we need to know about our students. So the culture of public learning kind of underlies the practice, and also, as well as the practice of supportive challenge. And what public learning actually looks like as a practice is a conversation, sometimes just between two educators, sometimes between small groups of educators, sometimes between a larger group of educators, but it always involves one person coming forward with a question or a dilemma or a challenge they're facing in their practice, and offering that to their colleague or to their colleagues for mutual examination, asking for their thought partnership, asking for them to help unpack this dilemma, unpack this challenge, help them see what they can't yet see on their own, knowing that we're all limited by our lived experiences, by our implicit biases, that it's only through inviting multiple perspectives onto our dilemmas and challenges that we can really understand the full picture. And in understanding, therefore, make better decisions about where we need to go and what we need to do next to better serve our students. And so, in that conversation, a tool or a technique that we support educators to use is what we call supportive challenge. And it's not just a challenge, and it's not just supportive, right? It's like a hybrid of those two things. So, with love and with care for our colleagues, assuming that they are doing the very best they can and know how to do, we help them to examine any assumptions or blind spots that may be getting in the way of them making those equitable decisions in service of their students. And often what that looks like is asking a question or making an observation about data. And when we say data, we don't just mean bar graphs and charts, although those are great too. But we often mean data that comes straight out of the public learner's classroom. So sometimes it's a piece of student work. Sometimes it's some anecdotal notes they took during an interaction with a student. Sometimes it's an interview they had with one of their focal learners. Often it's a video clip or a picture of students engaged in a learning task. And that piece of data becomes a shared text that everyone in the conversation can engage with together, so that the colleagues who are there to supportively challenge can offer their perspective on what they see going on. And a lovely thing about that is sometimes our assumptions and our biases, in holding those, we fall into some of those dominant narratives really that get in the way of us serving our students equitably. And so the supportive challenging question or observation is really what helps educators start to challenge those dominant narratives and tell other stories about their students, what they're capable of, and also tell other stories about themselves as educators. What am I capable of in service of these students? And so, in a nutshell, that's what those practices are. And they take time to develop. It's not something that folks just naturally automatically step into. But in our work with educators, we do a lot of modeling and reflecting on what powerful public learning and what effective supportive challenge looks like and sounds like, so folks can get their feet wet and then try it over time and improve in those areas as they go.
Man, I appreciate that. I love this idea of the myth of certainty. When Jen, when you mentioned that, I was just like, this makes sense, right? And so I think, we as educators, oftentimes that is what we're taught, that we have to be the gatekeepers of knowledge and understanding, and we must know all the things because we are the educators in the space. And if right, those listening and watching this, we know, because if you're ever at a game night with your friends, guess who gets asked to read and understand the directions for the game? It's the educator, right? That's my job all the time. Like, Charles, what are we supposed to do? I'm like, guys, I don't know all the things, but it's that myth of certainty, which I love. This idea then is the program, this organization, right? You all step in and say, hey, listen, we're going to dismantle this, because we understand that when we are in that place, when we're forced to have this idea of certainty, we tend to default to programming that we might have been raised with, right? And so we talked about the inequities that exist within those spaces, and then say we can challenge that by being collaborative, stepping back and actually learning, and not having to be the one with all the information, and doing so in a supportive environment where we're being challenged to stay in that space, but not doing so alone. So that way we're actually doing the work, which I love that idea of saying it's hard, but guess what? You're not alone. And so I'm saying all of this, and I'm sure people are listening and watching and thinking this is making sense. But I'm curious, like, why is this important? Why when we think about our educational landscape today, even despite, because I'm sure this is nothing new, right? This program just didn't start. So why are there still educators coming into the field with this myth of, certainty, saying I have to be the master of all? And look, why is this not more of a common practice where we're taking this collaborative approach and doing so where we're being supportive through that journey? Because listening to the two of you, it makes sense. And yet, if it made sense, you wouldn't be in existence. So why is this an issue within the field?
There's so many layers to what you're saying, but I think, first of
It's
all,
okay. We could have like a part 2 and 3. It's
I
no.
know we'll be here forever, listeners, but no.
Welcome to the 4-hour masterclass. No, I'm joking.
I think everybody acknowledges that the education system does not function equitably for everyone. There is historic, disproportionate outcomes that result of this system that we have created. And I think people with really kind of like the best of intentions want to figure out a way to fix it. And that drives a compliance driven mindset where I think the dominant narrative is if we could just get teachers to do things and to know more, maybe that's how we're going to fix this system. And I think what we at Lead by Learning feel is an important reframing of that is the educators on the ground are best situated to scan the system and unearth the problems that are happening locally to better support their students and communities. And the way that we can activate and amplify that power is not by forcing them to be a certain way. What we need to do is support them to be nimble and to be observers, partners, visionaries, to hold hope in community and to organize with one another to propel change. And so I think that is really messy. It's super confusing. It doesn't look the same everywhere. And as a result, it is harder to implement. And so we don't have comfort with that yet. But I do think it's important because if we want to actually change how people engage in day-to-day decision making and how educators support their students, we have to not only support them and activate that power, but through that process, and it's actually really important for this podcast, help them create new narratives about what is possible for their students, new narratives about their goals, get clarity on how they're going to understand progress along the way. All of that starts with the educator really examining the mental models and kind of the lived experience, the default practices, like you said, that are informing the way that they operate their classrooms and engage with students routinely. And so to me, that's why it's so important, because until we get to that grain size, all these dreams that are coming top down, they're going to hit a roadblock. And that's when they're actually landing on the ground, because practitioners don't have time to make sense of what they're doing for their students and to integrate the hopes and dreams of everybody on earth into their actual classroom and the students they're trying to serve.
That makes sense. And I'm curious, as you're thinking about this work, obviously this is what the organization is designed to do. And so, Sarah, I'm not sure if maybe you could speak to this. Can you talk a little bit about maybe a success story? And you don't necessarily have to share specific names or an organization, a school, a network, whatever it might be, but it sounds like it makes sense. And I'm sure that as you've been doing this, you're like, well, no, it does. Here's our evidence. So can you tell us a little bit about a shift you've seen within a space by taking this approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what Jen said about sort of that shift from the culture of compliance and the sort of let's
Hmm.
get teachers to do X, Y, or Z to that culture of teacher agency, teacher initiative, teacher understanding, and exploration. And I'm thinking of a partnership that we've had for many, many years with Oakland Unified School District. that support social and emotional learning in schools. And, SEL for both students and adults is such a hot button topic right now. And, everyone's kind of, especially post pandemic, really recognizing how critical it is that schools not just be a place where students learn content, but where they also feel that they belong, they feel
Mhm.
connected, they feel like they're part of a community. And same is true for educators. And so, in the early days of social emotional learning, and still to this day, there's kind of a glut of products on the market. There's this curriculum, there's that curriculum. And if we can just get teachers with fidelity to use this, that, or the other thing, that will lead to the social emotional learning experiences we want for students. And of course, we all know what happens when we take that line of, well, just do it with fidelity. Some teachers do, some teachers don't. It's all over the map. It's not necessarily a way to get the systemic outcomes we want for students. And so in our partnership with Oakland, they decided to take a different approach with our support, which was to empower a body of teacher leaders who they call their SEL lead learners to
Mm.
engage with us in collaborative inquiry into what social emotional learning means, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and what it looks like to meaningfully integrate social emotional learning into academic learning so that they're not standalone. Oakland does have a curriculum that they use in their elementary schools, so that's a great resource, but it became less about, well, let's make the teachers use this curriculum, and more about, let's create a space where teacher leaders can come together to understand the opportunities presented in this curriculum and make sense together of how they can use that resource, among others, to achieve the outcomes they want for students when it comes to integrating SEL with academics. And so those teachers have met with us for many years. And the SEL lead learner, those teacher leaders, have a leadership role at their site, which is to inspire their colleagues to also do that meaningful sense making around social emotional learning. How can we use this resource, this curriculum, not in a top down compliance way, but in a way that really serves us and serves our goals and serves the needs of our community? And so that's kind of one of the success stories in that it's really this reimagining of the role of the teacher in kind of helping drive the systems change or drive towards those bigger picture outcomes that Oakland Unified wanted to see. And in fact, there have been about 20 or so teacher leaders in our group. Next year, they're expanding to 50 so that every single elementary school has an SEL lead learner who comes and does this work with us. And there's hopefully in the future an opportunity for the secondary schools to get on board as well. So they're really starting to take a more whole systems approach than even they did in the past.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the things that I'm hearing is that this is it's an approach, it's a process. I think so oftentimes within our educational spheres, we're looking for quick fixes. Hence the reason why there's so many programs out there. And from what I'm hearing from you saying is like, no, this is not a quick fix. It is a program, not a program. I'm sorry. It is an approach. But here's the beautiful thing is that once this thing starts rolling, once it starts to take root, right, then it's sustainable. And when we start talking about implementing things with fidelity, we can't just get there, right? We have to build these systems and these structures. And it sounds like you're very instrumental in getting those things done. Am I hearing that?
I think that's right. I mean, we like to tell folks that our success story is when we make ourselves obsolete. If we can partner with our school systems and district systems for a number of years, but during that time, we're helping them to develop the internal leadership capacity. We're helping them to develop the processes and structures that can enable this culture of public learning and supportive challenge to sustain itself over time. And then we slowly kind of back ourselves off. That's what we hope to see. And we do have partners now who are no longer contracting with us, but who are continuing to do the work and use the systems and processes that we help them to put in place. So that's the hope always. And I think that that attention to the structural components of change is one that we've really kind of increased over time, as we've realized, it's not enough to just have the hope, the desire, the willingness. The system that's in place, the structures in place, the meeting structures, the leadership roles, all of that has to really align with that vision, so that they're not working against each other, but that the structures and the vision are going hand in hand.
Yes, and I kind of have an example of this because I remember a few years ago I was in a coaching call with a principal, and this principal was saying, man, in my meetings, I have some white teachers who really take a lot of airtime, and they don't give the floor to some of their BIPOC colleagues. They interrupt their BIPOC colleagues. I need them to stop doing this. And so I said, okay, well, what is it that you hope to see? And this principal was saying, I just want them to stop. So, should I just go tell them, stop interrupting? Do you recognize that you're taking this airtime in our faculty meetings? And I said, I think that's a really good indicator, but I think you're actually hoping for something bigger. What you're hoping for is that educator to be aware of any time they're in conversation with someone who identifies as BIPOC, whether it's a student, a family, to be conscientious of how much listening they're doing and how much talking they're doing, and to have an awareness of maybe some racialized dynamics that occur anytime they are relating to the community. So it's not just about these meetings. I mean, if it was just about these meetings, what a simple solution. Yeah, you could just tell them. But the thing that is undergirding that behavior is something that's informing that educators, actions across many, many conversations that they're having. And so to me, that is an example of how this is not a short game. This is a long game. It's about culture change. It's about changing behaviors, thinking, mindsets. And so that takes time, and it happens through those small day-to-day changes that we make. But each time we engage in something that deepens our awareness, that's actually an opportunity to shift and kind of get better at what we're trying to do. And so I think with that principle, that changed even the tenor of our conversation. Like, yeah, the thing you're solving for tomorrow is this meeting, but what you're really solving for is how a few of these teachers are engaging with your school, and the community.
Man,
And if I could just chime in, I love that focus on that coaching conversation, because a lot of the work we do now is with leaders. And I often think about patience, tenacious patience, courageous patience, that leaders have to be willing to see it as a long game and to coach those around them to do the same, and to resist that quick fix, which may be the Band-Aid solution for tomorrow, but is likely to circle back around and need even more work later on down the road. So I just wanted to chime in. That's a lot of what we work on with our leaders is to take that long view in a courageously patient way.
Well, I will say kudos to you for saying, hey, listen, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, right? We want to do this work so well, so that way our clients are not sitting there, right, with us all the time. And of course, many organizations, that is how they sustain, right? Because I'm not going to give you enough to let you away. I know some of my good friends and individual, like, they're like, hey, a cured patient is a lost customer. And I was like, that's such a cynical view of medicine. It's probably one of the reasons I don't visit the doctor as often as I should. But anyway, that is a whole nother conversation. So outside of the listeners or viewers collaborating with Lead by Learning, which we'll have a chance to plug that in just a second, I'm sure there are individuals listening and saying, this makes sense, right? Maybe they are sitting in a space right now where they have, leaned into this myth of certainty and saying, hey, you know what? I need to step back. I need to do some of this work. What would you recommend? What are, is there something they could read? Is there a first step? Is there something they can do to begin this journey outside of, looking you up and saying, how can we collaborate as an organization? But what is something they could do tomorrow after, or immediately when they jump off of this podcast, that they can begin doing this work?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk generally, and then Sarah, you can talk more concretely about things that we have. But I think something that educators probably already do to a certain degree, but maybe aren't heightening their awareness of, is tomorrow as you go about your work, what's something that confused you? Just identify that. And then give yourself permission to think about what was confusing about it. And we kind of think about those conversations. It could be framed around this creative tension model that Peter Senge talks about a lot, which is usually when we're experiencing confusion, it's because there is a disconnect between current reality and what we were hoping would happen, future vision. And so if you sit in the middle of those things, like this is what happened, this is what I was hoping would happen, those things aren't aligned. And so hence confusion now is happening for me. Give yourself permission to just sit in that. And then once you start to parse out, some key areas that of confusion, look at some data, ask yourself, who is someone that I can talk to about this? So that I'm not trying to figure this out on my own. And specifically for a leader, know that if you want other people to do that kind of work, either formally or informally, like when I was a teacher, I did it informally with people all the time. Did I have a lot of formal spaces to do that? Not as much. But if you're a leader trying to make more formalized collaborative spaces where that kind of conversation occurs, then you have to do it too. You are the first person. You are the early adopter, because you set the norm. You have so much more control over the cultural norms that are guiding your building. And so I would say that's like kind of the really basic starting point. But we do have a lot of things to support people. And so maybe I'll turn it to Sarah so you can talk more about those.
Sure. Yes, we do have a number of tools. We have a playbook for leaders of adult learning that talks about our foundational mindsets and practices. It's free for download on our website. And then we have a number of tools that are a supplement to the playbook that are specifically, again, for teachers and teacher leaders or site leaders who are facilitators of adult learning that have small, kind of light touch, low-hanging fruit ways to start to build a culture of public learning and supportive challenge. And so, in addition to those practical things, I think what I would say as a way to get started is to become an observer of the quality of collaboration at your site. And notice, how do teachers spend most of their time, and what are they talking about and how? Teacher talk comes in all different forms, and there's all different purposes for teachers being in a room together. All the way from kind of emotional venting and griping, all the way to the most sophisticated sense making about practice and kind of everything in between. And so I think a good starting place is just to kind of start to make a little pie chart in your mind, of what kinds of teacher talk are happening when, and then to set an intention maybe for yourself, whether you're a leader of that space or not, to shift that pie chart in the way that aligns with your vision for collaboration. So if most of the time is being spent planning field trips, for example, maybe you want to see more of that time being spent talking about student learning. What can you do in that space, whether you're the leader or not? And I like the phrase influence agenda. What is your influence agenda? Is there a way you can gently suggest to the leader of that space, hey, I've been so wanting to think more with this group about math. Can we spend some time on that next week? Or in a whole staff space, going to your principal and saying, hey, I've noticed that it's been great to hear folks share best practices, but I'm also really curious about what people are struggling with. What are their questions? Can we have a spotlight on a question time? That teacher voice is powerful, and leaders of collaboration actually sometimes really need that input from the folks in the room around what is and isn't working for them. So after you do that observing, to kind of think about how can you be that voice to help tip the balance of teacher talk toward what feels most purposeful and aligns most with your vision.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I mentioned to you prior to coming into this recording I was in a meeting, and it was definitely a space of lots of confusion and sitting in that. And I've just, as I was listening to you, Sarah, I was thinking, man, there's a confusion about where these conversations are taking place, and why are we spending so much time having that conversation when we should be having this other conversation? So even just from this discussion, I'm like, there are some things I'm going to be looking at tomorrow morning when I'm sitting in the office. So see, even in this time, I get to lead by learning. Look at that little plug. So I it always surprises me how quickly this time is moving along because we're already past 30 minutes. And so I just want to, as we begin wrapping up, you've shared some wonderful ideas of things listeners and viewers can do. You shared how you can support that work. So how can they find you? How can they reach out? How can they connect? Where should they begin if they want to learn more about Lead by Learning?
Yes. So we have a website, we leadbylearning.org, and there's all these open source resources are there, and there's also a way for you to get in contact with us. There's blogs. We really are strong believers in lifting up educator voices, and so that if you want to hear more stories on the ground, there's blogs that you can read, and just different offerings that are completely free to you. And then we are also on social media, and LinkedIn, Instagram, and I am also on LinkedIn. I don't know if that's enough to say I'm on all the platforms, but I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm always so excited to talk to people about this because I do feel like it makes a big difference for schools and for students and families.
Yeah, and I'm
Or
also happy for emails. I just got an email the other day from someone who read our playbook and said, "Hey, this is such a great
nice.
resource. Would love to chat more." So my email is s.sugarman@northeastern.edu, and always happy to chat with folks who are interested in this work.
Wonderful. Well, I will make sure that I drop all of that information in the show notes. And just in case you're listening to this while you're driving, please do not try to go find them on social media. We do not condone that, nor will we be responsible for your insurance upticks. So look at it in the show notes afterwards. But Sarah, Jen, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much, obviously, for being on this show. I know that this has been a long time coming. So thank you so much for being here. But more importantly, thank you so much for the work that you are doing for not just for me, because obviously personally I appreciate it, but for so many educators out there. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Until next time, y'all.